You got it? All right. Thank you. I'm on. I think I'm on here.
Yes, please.
Yep, I'm on. I got it. Okay. All right. Will you pray with me? Oh God, we thank you for this season of Easter and freedom that is ours. So I pray now that all that is heard and said and received will bring glory only to you in Jesus' name. Amen. So over the years, I have gotten acquainted with a man that lives just outside our neighborhood. He's lived in a tent. He's lived in a wooded area. He's lived in an RV at the auto repair shop at the end of the street, at various other places, and now he's living back in a tent. His name is Jerry. And the reason I mention him this morning is because he's not unlike the man in our gospel reading this morning. Jesus encountered a man by the pool of Beth-zatha, also known as Bethesda. And according to tradition, that an angel would come and stir that pool, and whoever made it into that pool first would be healed of his or her illness. And the gospel tells us that this man, that Jesus knew this man, had been there a long time. So I wonder, how did Jesus know that? Well, maybe the same way that I knew that Jerry had been on hard times for a long time. I first met him when he was walking down our street. And he had a scruffy beard, and his clothes were obviously too big for him, and he was walking quite slowly, and he was going from house to house and knocking on the door. And when he came to our house, he knocked on the door and he asked for food, and he asked if there were odd jobs that he could do. And based on that, I pretty much presumed that Jerry had been on hard times for quite a long time. And so when Jesus sees this man by the pool of Bethesda, who had been there, it said, been ill for 38 years, which is longer than the average lifespan of people at that time, Jesus observed that he had been there a while. Maybe people knew his name the way I know Jerry's name. Maybe he was the senior beggar and he had the prime spot at that pool. Maybe he had a range of belongings around him, as many people do that have been ill or homeless for a long time. So Jesus asked this man a question. Do you want to be made well? Sounds like kind of a rhetorical question to me. I mean, why would you be there for 38 years if you didn't want to be well? In effect, I had the same question for Jerry in my mind. And Carol and I presumed that he was serious about wanting to do odd jobs. And so Carol invited him to come over and help us lay sod in our yard, a project we had planned to do. And Carol even fronted him the money and told him, go get a good meal the night before and meet us in the morning. So in that early morning, Carol and I started that back-breaking work. It was several years ago. I don't think we would attempt it today. And Jerry was late. Jerry was so late that by the time he arrived, we had run out of sod and Carol had gone to the store to go get more. I was left to supervise Jerry. So Jerry worked slowly, very slowly. I said, Jerry, are you going to start laying some sod? Yeah, he said, I'm not feeling too well, but I'm getting to it. A few minutes later, I said, Jerry, I think you need to set down your drink if you're going to lay sod. Okay, I will, just a minute. A minute later, I'm working, I look up, and there's Jerry standing with a drink in one hand, a hand of some sod in the other hand, and his pants had totally dropped to the ground. And he wasn't wearing underwear. But thankfully, I saw only the backside. I said, Jerry, your pants fell off. Oh, yes, okay. And so I go on the phone, hysterical. Carol, you've got to get home as soon as possible and help me with Jerry. So she hurried home, and she did the most practical thing. She went and got him a belt. Well, we learned that Jerry had taken the money that Carol had fronted him the night before, gone to the local bar, and drank too much. Jerry was an alcoholic. Jesus asked that man by the poolside, "Do you want to be made well?" And we might expect a resounding, "Yes, of course I want to be made well. I would give anything." But instead, the man offers up a complaint. Sounds almost like an excuse to me. "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm making my way there, somebody gets in front of me." Really, I want to say? Sounds like a victim mentality. In 38 years, which is 13,870 days, you could not figure out how to get to that pool before anybody else. Can it be that he just really has no interest in being made well? I mean, he's surviving there. His whole world is probably revolving around that pool. His religious world, his economic world. And if he was healed, it would just disrupt that whole world that he knows. Reverend Eric Elnes said that this man was stricken by the fear of uncertainty, one of the topics that we explored during our Lenten study. Life outside of that pool may have just been too uncertain for him. And then we might be further convinced of this man's reluctance to be healed when, in fact, after being made well, he goes to the temple carrying his mat. And he is questioned about carrying his mat on the Sabbath. He blames Jesus for telling him to do so, though he doesn't even know Jesus' name. And then when he meets Jesus, learns his name, he goes back to religious authorities, turns Jesus in. And I want to say, what a dirty, rotten scoundrel. After our many attempts to help Jerry over years, Carol and I resolved that Jerry just did not want to be made well. And we were angry about it. We began to avoid Jerry. When I was driving down the road, I was hoping he wouldn't see me or on my bicycle. And in fact, we were a bit horrified when he told us one day that he became our neighbor. There was a reclusive man that lived just about 7 doors down from us. And this man had cancer, and Jerry actually moved in with him and helped take care of him. And we just saw it as a nuisance to the neighborhood. But after studying this story, I have a renewed empathy for Jerry. What if that man by the pool was not irresponsible? Maybe he just got caught up in the system and got cynical. Even though he had no results for 38 years, he must have heard about other people who'd gotten well by those healing waters. And he must have just thought, well, I just got to keep waiting here patiently, and it'll happen one day for me. And so many other people in society got caught up in that myth of that system, that everyone could benefit at that pool. When we see the story in this light, maybe the subtext of Jesus' question might be, do you really think you can get well and become whole in this system you're relying on? Often the margins and the poor of our society get caught up in the system. They lack access to real help. And we pass laws that make it more and more difficult for people to get health care or public assistance. Those who are down by the poolside. We pass laws that make it hard for example, immigrant children to get financial aid to get an education. We support laws that perpetuate that certain members of our society are second-class citizens. And mostly we do this, I think, because in our hearts we just give up on them. Or we believe that deep down they really don't deserve that much help. When my mom was in the emergency room with her heart attack 4 years ago, I went out to the hallway, and there in the hallway, on a cot, was Jerry. And I don't know if it was from intoxication or his untreated diabetes or lack of nutrition. But I must say that my response at seeing him there was not without judgment. I wanted to say, Jerry, do you want to be made well? But in my mind, the answer was already no. So lately, I have repented of my attitude towards Jerry. And last week, I saw him sitting on the bench at the end of the street at the bus stop. And I pulled over, got out of my car, went and sat and talked to him. And he looks worse than ever. He probably looks about 30 years older than his age of 54. And I learned that he now has bone cancer. And the doctors won't treat him with pain medication because of his blood alcohol levels. He's in pain all the time. And he's often hungry, he said. I asked him about going to rehab for his addiction. He said, I've already gone to rehab 18 times. He said, but every time I get out, I just go past the liquor store and I can't help myself. I said, well, do you have a way to get to the doctor to help you? And he said, oh, there's no need to go to the doctor. They won't help me. Sounds like Jerry has been caught up in the system that is not working for him and has not worked for him for a very long time. He still works, if you want to call it that. He goes to the car repair shop and he sits outside and does security. I think they just take pity on him. And they give him a few dollars a week, probably for his alcohol and for a little bit of food. But he said, I avoid going there during the day anymore because there's a new mechanic, and that new mechanic just calls me a scum of the earth and no good. But despite all of that, Jerry really still has a charm about him, and he always has a way to make me laugh or smile. This morning I hear those words of Jesus to Jerry, that Jesus said to that man at the poolside, stand up, take your mat, and walk. The systems of society have not saved you, but I will, says Jesus. Jerry said he's been told he only has a few months left to live. And I asked him how he felt about that, or how he was dealing with that news. And he said, you know, I feel Jesus right next to me all the time. I feel Jesus walking with me. Do I think Jerry could have done more to get well? Probably. And in some ways, I think that now that Jerry is near the end, that he is standing up and walking with Jesus. At least I know that Jesus is walking with Jerry and giving him grace, hopefully, until the very end. So this time I gave Jerry some money, and I said, Jerry, can you go get food with this money and not buy alcohol? He said, I can. He says, I already have some alcohol. So I'm going to go get some food with this money. At the pool of Beth-zatha, Jesus, rather than helping that man get into the pool of water, as he believed, Jesus said, let's just bypass this whole system. It's not working for you. You see, Jesus brings life, while everything else just brings waiting and waiting and waiting. So in this story about this cynical, ungrateful man at the pool of Bethesda, it's so easy to see people like Jerry in this story. But we gotta, at some point, see ourselves also in this story. What's the personal message that it has for us? Some of us have been in need of healing for a very, very long time. We may have been waiting for 38 years or longer. It might be a physical ailment, but for many of us, we might be plagued by something we've been hiding or holding deep inside. Maybe it is a destructive habit. Maybe it's a deep hurt. Maybe it's a mental or spiritual dilemma. And we probably just got comfortable carrying that around all these years. And it may have made us hopeless or even cynical. So today is the day to hear Jesus ask that question to you. Do you want to be made well? But Jesus, I've tried so many times. There's no one that can help me. I've got comfortable just sitting here and waiting and waiting. And then that angel never appears and never stirs that water. But Jesus says, I'm going to give you another way around the system you've been working all these years. Because you've tried that way, and you've relied on old thinking and old systems, and you've gotten comfortable with maybe even the pain or the hurt or the heavy load. And Jesus says, this time, it's time to take action. Today, stand up, take your mat, and walk. That is the whole gospel. Stand up, take your mat, and walk. The good news that we don't have to be as we are. We don't have to be trapped in our fears or our histories. We have the freedom to heal. And so this morning, I want us to spend time focusing on healing during our response time. If you need healing of something today, something major, maybe something that you think is minor, I think we all have areas in our lives that need healing. So I'm going to invite you to take the piece of paper that's attached to your bulletin. And there's a pen in your seat back. And I want you to write either a word or a phrase that represents that healing that you need today. And we're going to sing this song, Water, River, Spirit, Grace. And as we sing that song, we invite you to come forward, and there are bowls of water here, and ask you to place this in the water, and it will dissolve so no one else will see what you've written. And as you place it in there, stir that in, knowing that Jesus will stir those waters for you today.